Welcome to Behind the Police, a production of iHeartRadio. Welcome back to Behind the Police, the special mini-series for Behind the Bastards, which is normally a show that I, Robert Evans, do about the worst people in all of history. But for these weeks and these episodes is a deep dive into the entire history of American police, the greatest bastards of them all.
A collection of them.
Yeah. My guest in this journey into the history of policedom is my friend Jason Petty, better known as the hip-hop artist Propaganda. Jason, how are you doing today?
What's up? Happy Juneteenth.
Mm-hmm.
The actual
the actual one.
Day of Independence.
Yes.
You know? Yeah.
Yes. The day that, like, we as a nation kind of sort of started to begin to try to live up to the promises made at our founding, except not for women.
Yeah. So there's still another. Yeah. We're still waiting for another. There's another independence coming soon.
Yeah. It's been a rough couple of centuries.
It's been a rough couple centuries, guys. Yeah. Fun fact: the 13th, the Emancipation Proclamation was 2 years before this because the war wasn't done, and still we were waiting on Texas.
Yeah. And in some ways still are.
Still, yeah.
As a Texan, I can say.
I think we're still kind of waiting on Texas.
So, in honor of, it won't be Juneteenth anymore when these episodes drop, but these two episodes this week, we're going real deep into the history of racism and policing. That's what these next two episodes are going to be, and then after that, we're going to kind of get back to a broader history of policing and come up to the modern era. We'll talk about the war on drugs and cops and stuff, but these two episodes are going to be more focused on something that I think is critical, but not very well known to most people. You know, usually there's one aspect to which kind of what we're talking about is known today, which is that if you've wound up at a protest recently, which I assume a lot of you have, you may have heard the venerable left-wing protest chant, "Cops and Klan go hand in hand." And if you're a fan of Rage Against the Machine, I'm sure you're familiar with their similar line. Some of those that work forces are the same that burn crosses. And, you know, we talked a bit about how, the sort of story spreading about slave patrols and how that was the origin of policing and how that was, partly true, but not entirely accurate because it was more complicated than that. This is a case where the kind of like pithy chants and social media posts and stuff actually are really accurate. Like that. Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today.
So in a very veiled defense for everybody else that didn't have to live these realities. Like there's some realities, like something like a redlining. Like I understand that there is a wide swath of people. You have to go out of your way unless you black to know what redlining is because it doesn't affect you. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So I'm going to give you that. I don't know the script, but I know based on the way that Robert's leading in, I have an idea that I'm probably going to know these stories, but I'm pretty sure you don't because they ain't affected you. You ain't never thought about redlining because there was never a time that your grandparents was looking at a neighborhood and was like, we can't live here. And it's not because you couldn't afford to live here. It's because you wasn't allowed to live here. You know what I'm saying? So I understand that you don't know this. There's probably things in your life, like we could talk about some Native American heritage and stories and such like that you probably would have no idea unless you went out of your way. I went out of my way to learn those things because I understand what it means to be an oppressed person. So strap in. This is about to be earth-shattering for you.
It's going to be rough.
Yes.
So in the immediate wake of the war, remember after part one, we kind of ended on slave patrols just turning right into police departments.
Yes.
But in the immediate wake of the war, a lot of the South was, occupied by the United States military, the Union military. And millions of black men had suddenly gained the right to vote for the first time, like kind of right around that same period. And historians generally call the time from 1865 to 1877 in the former South Reconstruction. And it was a time of great hope for black Americans. 700 black men were elected to public office, including 2 senators and 14 members of the House of Representatives, which when you consider that like a huge chunk of those men had been slaves a couple of years earlier, like that's that's maybe the rapidest turnaround from politically being, not a person to being in power that like has ever happened. Yes. 1,300 black men and women were appointed to various government jobs during this period. Freedmen pooled their resources. They formed companies. Some of them fought to receive back wages and even tried to take land from their former masters. It was generally not successful, but attempts were made. And all across the South, groups of freedmen also formed militias, sometimes using the rifles with which they had served in the Union Army. And obviously, a lot of white folks weren't happy with this.
Yeah, it worked. It's like, so they go, you know what? We're just going to let them. You forget that, especially in the South, the vast majority of the population were freed slaves. So just by the sheer numbers, if you let us vote, we're going to vote in our own people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's right. You're not going to be in charge anymore.
Yeah.
Just it's
work the numbers.
So this was a pickle for the white supremacists. We could say that fairly. And outside of the transition of slave patrols to police departments, a lot of white people just sort of on their own attempted to put newly freed black people in their place by using the law to suppress them. Laws were passed throughout the old slave states that banned vagrancy or being out in public without a visible means of support. You might recognize this as the same tactic used a little bit later to stop union workers from organizing in other parts of the country. So that is kind of we can see sometimes the exact same tactic being used for very different groups of oppressed Americans. But it's the same thing. Like, what if we just make it illegal for them to be outside? So in this case, vagrancy laws were used to force black people to take employment, generally as sharecroppers. So you make it illegal to be outside without a job. That forces people to take jobs. And since like you don't want to go to jail, your choice, like you have to very quickly get whatever job you can get, which means people, the power is in the hands of the person offering you the job, which means they can give you a job that's basically slavery, which is in fact what a lot of sharecropping jobs
were. That's exactly what sharecropping was.
So again, not quite slavery, but also not nearly as far from being slavery as it really ought to have been. Yeah.
Slavery light.
Yeah, slavery light. A little bit of diet slave. It's like the Coke Zero of enslaving human beings.
Just 1 calorie.
Yeah. It is better for you, but
not very much better.
Yeah, not very much better.
Yes.
And it'll probably give you a brain tumor.
Yes.
So I want to. I'll cut that bit out if Coke Zero wants to sponsor the podcast.
I will take your money.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I want to kick off our quotations in this episode with one from the absolutely critical book that everybody ought to read, "The End of Policing" by Alex Vitale. Quote,
let's go.
Anyone on the roads without proof of employment was quickly subjected to police action. Local police were the essential front door of the twin evils of convict leasing and prison farms. Local sheriffs would arrest free blacks on flimsy to non-existent evidence, then drive them into a cruel and inhuman justice system whose punishments often resulted in death. These same sheriffs and judges also received kickbacks and in some cases generated lists of fit and hardworking blacks to be incarcerated on behalf of employers, who would then lease them out to perform forced labor for profit. Douglas Blackmon chronicles the appalling conditions of mines and lumber camps where thousands perished. By the Jim Crow era, policing had become a central tool of maintaining racial inequality throughout the South, supplemented by ad hoc vigilantes such as the Ku Klux Klan, which often worked closely with and was populated by local police. Good little summary of how that all went down.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. So, the motherfucking KKK.
Let's get into it, baby.
Now, we've done a whole two-parter on the history of the Klan, the first and the second Klan at least, on Behind the Bastards already. So if you want a detailed history of both of those organizations, you can check that out. It's in the Behind the Bastards feed. But I'm going to give a little bit of an overview before we dig into the cop, specific stuff. The KKK formed initially in Pulaski, Tennessee in 1866. The very first... Pulaski.
It's like saying Pulaski.
Pulaski, yeah. It's a fun name of a town. It's a shame.
Yeah.
All of the terrorism. Anyway, The very first KKK cell was formed by a bunch of bored, drunk, and pretty well-off Confederate veterans. They dressed up like wizards and they gave themselves absurd titles and went out at night, costumed as the ghosts of Confederate veterans in order to scare freed black people. One of the KKK founders happened to own the local newspaper, and he published a bunch of mysterious letters from a grand cyclops, all of which made the Klan seem cool and mysterious and powerful. This early meme, and that's really what the KKK was at the start, spread very quickly throughout the South, and soon thousands of white dudes were dressing like ghosts and terrorizing black people, generally while drunk as all hell. Sometimes they wore dresses. Other times they pretended to be aliens. They did this because it was fun, but also because it made their abuse more impactful. In her fantastic book, Ku Klux, Elaine Parsons explains this in a way that I think is really important when it comes to just sort of understanding modern right-wing street violence and why a lot of it seems so silly, like a lot of the ways they dress up and act are so like on its surface absurd. Quote, Ku Klux endeavored to portray victims' entirely rational fear of their physical violence as though it were superstition or gullibility. The victim tellingly failed to get the joke, allowing himself to be frightened by ghosts or devils.
Get the joke?
Yeah. They didn't get the joke. It was
hey, man,
funny.
You don't get it, bro. It's just a
and then
joke.
I shot at you. Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't get
while I'm hanging from my neck.
Yeah.
You get it?
Yeah. We hung you from a tree and we were dressed as aliens. You don't get the joke? You're so scared of aliens.
Yeah. Yeah. There it is.
Yeah. Fucking fascists are always the same.
Bud.
Yeah.
What? Yeah. At some point, you have to explain to me in one of these bastard episodes why far right fascists are just not funny.
Yeah.
Why is it just not funny?
It's because comedy, good comedy requires, what's the word I'm looking for here? Empathy, right? Like you have to understand other people in order to say things that are funny to them.
There it is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Anyway.
Yeah, many, if not most, of these early Klansmen were former slave patrol members, and a sizable number of these early Klansmen, in addition to being former slave patrol members, were also current law enforcement, sheriffs and the like. There was also, outside of, even the Klan, just a huge amount of vigilante violence directed against black people during this time, and it all does sort of bleed together. One Edgefield County, South Carolina military officer, like a U.S. military officer stationed in the former Confederacy in 1866, wrote this, quote, 2 men, white, had killed a Negro plus cut the ear off another the evening before, about 5 miles left of my encampment. It is presumed they belong to a regular organized band of guerrillas which infests that country. It is practiced among these monsters either to kill or mutilate any colored people who unluckily falls into their power. None of the colored people dared to sleep in their houses at night, but had to take refuge in the surrounding country. Some part of the peaceful, loyal white population are well acquainted with the haunts of these depredators, but dread them would they betray them, as there is no protective power in the country. They are a terror to the loyal population at night. These ruffians besotted with drink rave and tear, like prairie Indians, through the streets of the city. The civil law is powerless to protect against such desperados. That's interesting because it gives you an idea of how terrifying it was during this period, how these people acted.
Yeah.
It gives you also like a look into the head of sort of, I guess what you'd call like a white ally who was also still really racist against Native Americans. Like,
I was like,
there's a lot happening.
Like a prairie Indian.
Yeah.
That is of all the whole sentence. That's what I caught. Where I was like, wait, what?
It's like, you're so okay.
What are we talking? Yeah, I was like, it's like the record skipped. Yeah, where I was just like, yeah, man, hold up.
Yeah, it's kind of like you want to be really proud of like Ulysses Simpson Grant because, as flawed as he was, he beat the Confederacy. He was pretty committed to black people not being slaves. He was committed to them having the right to vote. He did some really good stuff as president for black people. Real terrible record with the Native Americans. Just like real bad.
Abysmal with the natives. Yeah.
So... we do have a couple of founding members of this country that we can be comprehensively proud of, but they're pretty much just Thomas Paine, actually. When
just
you're looking at white folks and John Brown.
Yeah,
about it. John Brown. There was a neat moment in his history where he was like asked by some white folks he lived around to help them clear out a group of Native Americans from the community, and he was like, "I'd rather clear your ass out of here." Yeah, good guy, John Brown. So, Civil law was often powerless to stop these kind of bands of marauding white terrorists or insurgents, really, in this period of time. But civil law was also often on board with this kind of violence. So it was a mix of, we really have no resources to stop these people, and we also don't want to stop these people. And a good example of how this looked comes from the case of Union County, South Carolina. That town included a virulent cell of Klansmen, roughly organized around a local criminal named Bill Fawcett. Now, Fawcett had been a member of another anti-black guerrilla band known to Union troops as Slickers previously. He and his friends seem to have slid rather seamlessly into becoming Klansmen once that was the hip new way to be racist terrorists. Fawcett was repeatedly arrested for disorderly conduct and violence, but he had good connections to local law enforcement, and he and his friends were also tied heavily into the wealthy gentry in Union County. So they never really did any hard time because they were good smugglers, and they helped keep the rich people in the county well supplied with tax-free liquor. One of the wealthy men who supported Fawcett in his vigilante activities was James Rice Rogers. He sold the illegal liquor that Fawcett smuggled, and he was also the county sheriff in 1870. So
there
that's good. Yeah.
Bring it right back around to the cops. Yeah.
And again, we're seeing kind of the same thing we are seeing in like the big, northern cities in this period of time where the police are intimately tied with vice, right? So on the night of December 31st, 1870, Union County was struck by a series of violent raids. And this kind of originated from a clash between white and black folks that's still very complex. It started when two of Fawcett's men set out to deliver a barrel of illegal whiskey, and they were stopped on the road by a checkpoint of black militiamen. And these guys were actually from two different black militias who had set up patrols in the area they lived because there were bands of armed Klansmen riding about. And those Klansmen had killed people recently. Not just black people, but also like white Republicans in this period.
Yeah.
So
let that be a mind bender for y'all.
Yeah.
That they're killing Republicans. Republican meant something different back then.
Yeah. Sure did. So there's these bands of, armed Klansmen running around killing people. And so black folks set up militias to protect their neighborhoods, right? So they're doing like armed community self-defense. And this group of Fawcett's, men start driving up to one of these checkpoints with a barrel of illegal whiskey. And this militia holds Fawcett's men up and they demand they hand over the whiskey. It's kind of unclear if they just want the whiskey because they're like, oh, hey, let's get some whiskey. Yeah. Or if they're more like, you guys are sketchy as hell. You kind of seem like the Klan dudes because these guys were both probably Klansmen who have been riding around and like, we want to see what the hell is up. And obviously these white dudes weren't willing to like listen to what a bunch of black militia said, and they ride off. And so the black militiamen open fire at their wagon. And I'm going to quote from historian Elaine Parsons here. Perhaps it was important to the pickets or those who fired that white men not dismiss their armed demands and drive breezily by. Such pickets were part of how power operated in Union, and to mobilize the resources to set one up only to have it dismissed might have serious consequences. Perhaps the shots were not about the whiskey at all. There is some reason to suspect that Stevens, who's one of the men driving that whiskey train, having passed through the organized group, would have headed straight to Fawcett, which might well have led to trouble not unlike that which was caused by shooting. So like they might have been worried that these people were going to go back to the Klan and try to organize an attack on the picket. And trouble definitely followed, them shooting at the wagon. Both of Fawcett's men immediately got out of the wagon and fled, but one of them was caught and he was executed by the militia, and his body was posed in a manner similar to how Klansmen in the area had posed recently executed black men. Parsons continues. The black militia here was replicating the subculture of collective violence with which Union Countyans were familiar. Picketing a road to defend one of their own from attack was conventional Union County behavior, as probably was the shakedown of Stevens. Even shooting after the retreating figures of Stevens and Robinson as they ran their picket would perhaps not have been particularly abnormal in as gun-happy a culture as Union County's. The killing of Stevens made it a much more serious matter, of course. Militiamen, however, might have miscalibrated elites' willingness to support Fawcett's marginal men. Giving Stevens his liminal status, he was a criminal, had the militia been composed of white members, it seems likely that the whole affair would have blown over. Indeed, when Stevens' peer, Thomas Jefferson Greer, had been shot just months earlier, his assailant, who was another white guy, had enjoyed widespread public support. But again, John Sanders had been a white man. The fact that a black militia had killed a white guy was not okay to local white elites. And so large armed groups of white men formed up and started confiscating militia weapons from black homes, disarming them first.
Here we go.
Yeah.
So like I get a bunch of pushback from said, right-wing anarchists, boogaloo dudes who are like low-key boogaloo but don't want to admit it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Saying like, I don't understand why black people don't arm themselves. Like, you doing all this peaceful protest. Maybe you should, like, you yelling at us about being malicious, coming out here heavily armed. Maybe y'all should start being heavily armed, as if we ain't never thought of that. You know what I'm what makes you think that thought ain't crossed our mind yet? You know what I'm saying? Like, do you want me to go? You did a thing on the Mulford Act already. You know what I'm saying? We did that already. But like this, what year is this? What year are you talking about right now?
Yeah, it's this. I'm a supporter of not just black people, but members of marginalized groups, particularly as we continue to hurdle towards an uncertain future, considering armed self-defense.
Yes,
but, that's been done a lot, and historically. Yeah. There's a lot more armed white people. And so it's still like, it's not the solution. Yes. Yeah.
It's not the solution. And like, why you think we ain't thought of that? Like, you think we ain't thought of that? Like, this has been tried before.
And sometimes it does work. We'll actually going to be talking about this a few times in this episode. Yeah. It's not like again, I'm one of the anarchists being like, consider it, you know? It's not a bad idea.
Yes, I'm not saying consider it, but these people talking to me as if we never thought about it.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
From the fucking beginning. Yeah.
From the beginning. What makes you think, come on, bruh.
And what happens, you know, the black people in Union County are organized and they are armed, and white people start going door to door and taking guns out of individual homes.
And the reality of like, I love the part of that passage that was like, this is not abnormal. Like what I wish I could run through all of the streets of America and explain is American culture is violent. Like all of your statues are war heroes.
Yeah.
We're founded on a protest. This is a violent culture. And our country, our power structures, they respond to violence. So I just don't I'm not telling you this is the right way. I'm just telling you this is the ocean you swimming in. You know what I'm saying? Right?
Yeah.
We are saltwater fishies. That's what we are. We are a violent culture. So you mad at somebody else who's experiencing violence, right? It's incumbent on those experiencing violence to remain peaceful. It means like, I don't think you asking me to be a freshwater fish in a saltwater ocean. Like, I just don't know what to tell you. The water is violent. So this is what's going to happen. Yeah.
So, so the white folks start taking all the guns of the black people who were in militias. And they also arrest dozens of black men, many of whom had no ties to the militias. Now, some of these men attempted to resist, but they ultimately decided that a gunfight would do them no good. They basically were like holed up in a house that was surrounded by white folks, and they had the choice: do we defend ourselves or do we give ourselves up? And kind of the decision was, if we defend ourselves, we will either kill or injure some of these white folks, and they will be really angry when they finish killing us because there's a lot more of them, and they're going to burn down every black house in the neighborhood, right?
Yeah, they like white people at this time, and even this, and at that time, and in this time, but mostly at that time are
they're super
kings of elevation. You know what I'm saying? Like, you elevate the moment, like dial the heat up. You know what I'm saying?
So these folks like give themselves up to save the neighborhood. Now, for several days, the white elites in Union County debated over this list of randomly arrested black men that they had, and deciding, basically, we're trying to decide how many of them can we punish and how many of them can we spare without provoking a broader race riot among, like, because, you know, there were like a chunk of folks in power who understood like most of these arrests are bullshit, but also we have to punish some black people more or less at random. Otherwise, the poor white folks in the county are going to go on a race riot. So there's like this big debate with the local elites. And Alice Walker, the head of a local black militia, gets arrested on his way to travel to the governor to warn him about what's happening in Union County. Now, Walker hadn't been present at any of the events that had sparked this, but he was hated by the most racist of the local whites because he was the organizer of a black militia. So local law enforcement decided that his death would go really far in calming the white mob. Now, Walker had supporters who were ready to rally to his defense armed, but again, he told them not to. He was innocent, and he was certain that a court case would bear out his innocence. But he never got the chance to actually, do that. On January 5th, a huge gang of Ku Klux Klansmen raided the Union County Jail and abducted 5 arrested black men, who also happened to be prominent local Republicans. Parsons writes, quote, "It is not possible to name many of the members of the costumed group, but because, though not all of the men were on horseback and were costumed, we can imagine that many of the group's members were elites. From the size of the group, even if we accept only a cautious estimate, it seems likely that they came from adjoining counties. There is a good deal of evidence that some of Fawcett's friends were present in a leadership role at this event. And one man who was later named by witnesses to the raid as a leader of the Klan mob that abducted all these black men was Fawcett's good buddy, Sheriff Rice Rogers." So again, that's how they get into the jail. Is the sheriff is a Klansman and he lets them the fuck in. Yeah, and obviously, what you're expecting happens to these black men, and it's tragic. Totally. Yeah, and it's possible even that so there was one of the things that did happen when the KKK showed up at this jail is they struggled with a deputy to get the keys, and it's heavily suspected by historians, including Elaine Parsons, that this was all kind of an act, and that it's likely that the deputy who struggled with the Klan after giving up the keys put on a Klan costume and engaged in the raid after being robbed.
I could totally picture that. Hey, don't take my key. Don't take my key. Look, I'm doing the right thing. Wow.
Yeah. And it is a lot. And this I highlight this story because I think specific stories are kind of useful in getting people emotionally involved. But this is this happened, we'll never know how many times, constantly. The whole idea of a mob showing up at the jail and the officers handing over the keys or straight up just participating in the raid of the jail with Klan robes on was a constant story during this period. Now, as a rule, local law enforcement either, again, helped actively or turned a blind eye to Klan violence out of fear. Watching from Washington, D.C., President U.S. Grant was shocked by what seemed to be nothing so much as a resurgent Confederate movement in his country. Yeah. So when he'd come to power, Grant had believed that the passage of the 15th Amendment, which guaranteed black men the right to vote, would solve the problem of securing the rights of newly freed black people. He was taken by surprise by the vicious string of murders that followed black emancipation. In Chattanooga, Tennessee, a black man named Andrew Flowers defeated the white candidate for Justice of the Peace in an 1870 election. Despite the fact that this man had just been elected justice, police were nowhere in evidence, while Klansmen whipped and beat him and told him that no N-word would hold office in the United States. Again, common story.
Yeah.
And thankfully Flowers survived. Yeah.
Again, hey, why don't you just put black people in office? You think we ain't thought of that?
Yeah. You got to deal with the problem of mass violence being done to black people in support of white supremacy, not always by white people, but in support of white supremacy. Because we'll talk next week about how having black officers in police departments works, because it doesn't always work the way you might suspect.
No, because white supremacy, we talked about the first one, whiteness is a thing.
Yeah. You know what isn't the Ku Klux?
Oh, God. Jesus.
No, that's not a good way to do this. It might be,
though. That's the thing.
I mean,
that's the hard part.
Let's not analyze that too much right now.
Let's just go with from episode 1, fuck the police. It's time for an ad break.
We're back. Oh, my gosh. You know what I love is being back from ads, because it means that we can talk more about the horrific history of racism and law enforcement.
The terror and trauma that sits inside of my DNA and is passed on generationally.
Woo!
Yes.
Should have had an air horn there. So, starting in 1870, President Grant began to lobby Congress to give him power to do something about the Klan. Because, again, local law enforcement was actively aiding and abetting the KKK.
Yeah.
In 1870 and 1871, Congress passed the Enforcement Acts. These protected the rights of black men to vote, hold office, and serve on juries, and generally enjoy equal protection under the law. The Ku Klux Klan Acts, as they came to be known, allowed President Grant to call up the army in order to arrest and break up the bands of disguised night marauders. And we're going to be 99% critical of law enforcement on this podcast, but we got to be fair when it's important to be fair. And federal law enforcement did a pretty decent job on breaking up the Klan.
Yeah. Full
and
respect.
This is where things get really complicated, Prop, because a lot of the credit for this goes to Amos Ackerman, the Attorney General of the United States. Ackerman joined the Republican Party after the Civil War and became one of the nation's most strenuous advocates for black suffrage. He was like, black people have the right to vote and hold office, and I will make sure we enforce this with fucking riflemen if we have to.
Yes.
Historian William S. McFeely said of Ackerman that, quote, no attorney general before or since has been more vigorous in the prosecution of cases designed to protect the lives and rights of black Americans. And here's where things get complicated, because before he was a Republican, before he was the attorney general, Amos Ackerman volunteered and fought in the Confederate Army.
Sheesh. People have layers of complication.
People are complicated.
They in them contain minis.
Yeah. And this, if for Amos, this seems to have been like it seems to have been more a matter of like, you hear about these folks who are like really loyal to their state for reasons I have trouble understanding. Like, he doesn't seem to have joined the Confederate Army specifically to fight for slavery, although he fought for slavery because that's what the Confederate Army fought for. But in his mind, I think it was more like, I'm really loyal to Georgia. I don't know. I can't get in the head of that guy, but I guess if you can make that up, he tried to afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I want to give it to the possibility that people, probably hundreds of them at the time, you know, like you said, just was like, look, we're down here. This is what we do. We fighting for our way of life. I guess that's right. And in the middle of that, finally had this like, you know, this is bullshit. You know what I'm saying? And was like, but if you the onlyest person for miles talking like this, it's probably hard to find some good community, and you're probably going to fumble, and then you become this guy to where you're like, hey, there's one thing I can do. I could probably like dismantle this Klan thing. That seems like a good thing to do. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, if there's a thing that can make up for volunteering to serve in the Confederate Army, I guess it's dismantling the KKK.
I guess,
like yeah, like that's a good
it's a good place
try
to start.
At least. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the worst Klan violence was in South Carolina, and Grant declared martial law in that state, citing a condition of lawlessness. He suspended habeas corpus, and numerous Klansmen were rounded up by federal authorities, including Sheriff Rice Rogers, who we have been talking about. A lot of sheriffs got pulled up in this. So the Senate held extensive hearings where hundreds of black victims of the Klan were allowed to tell their stories to the nation. Under Ackerman's direction, 600 Klansmen were convicted and 65 of them sent to a federal penitentiary. By 1872, the Klan was no longer a meaningful force in the United States. Frederick Douglass himself said that without President Grant's actions, black Americans would have been trapped again in a condition almost identical to slavery. That is probably true, but it's also true that Grant kind of botched the landing on this one, firing Ackerman to appease his political rivals and commuting the sentences of some Klansmen in a bid for reconciliation. So again, can't stand here, you know. Let's be fair. But also, you know, it is fair to say that Ulysses Simpson Grant was probably the best presidential advocate for black rights that existed until at least FDR.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, probably not until the New Deal, you know?
Yeah. And even like,
even he got an asterisk next to his name. You know what I'm saying?
Couple of them. Yeah. So terrorism was, however, briefly out as a method of repressing black Americans and enforcing white supremacy, or at least terrorism in kind of an organized fashion, because we're going to talk about lynching later. This left the law and law enforcement as the last organized refuge for white supremacists. The black codes had been made illegal in 1868 when the 14th Amendment gave black people equal protection under the law. But in 1877, the first Jim Crow laws began to be passed, mandating separate public spaces for black and white people. Suddenly, white and black people were now expected by law to use separate schools, libraries, water fountains, and restaurants. The police could no longer arrest black men for voting, although that absolutely still happened, but they could arrest black people for entering white spaces. The Klan was gone, but the police remained, and for decades they took over the hard work of enforcing white supremacy from the terrorists. In 1915, William J. Simmons, former minister, performed a real act of resurrection and brought the KKK back to life. Now, Simmons had been a big nerd for things like the Masons and other fraternal societies that were a big part of life back in the day, clubs where men would gather and dress up in costumes and do silly rituals and generally get drunk. Simmons wanted to make a society of his own, and he decided that reviving the old KKK would be easiest because then he could cash in on the Klan's name recognition and branding. Again, I cover all this in that two-parter that we already did on the show, but before we move on to the cop stuff, the important thing to know is that the second Klan was fucking huge. While the first had been a relatively small group of terrorists, the second Klan had its terrorists, but it was largely a social club that included millions of Americans at its height. They had a summer camp. Like, it was not quite the same thing.
Let that sink in, guys.
Yeah. They sold branded equipment and stuff. Like, and in a lot of ways, they were basically a pyramid scheme. Simmons engaged a PR firm to help him repackage this old terrorist group as a cool club for families. By 1920, the whole thing had gone viral nationwide, and the Klan did engage in pushing racist laws. But for the folks at the top, I think more than even a force for racism, the Klan was a grift, right? Now, there were a lot of racists in, like, everyone in the Klan was a racist still, and there were a lot of racists who were like the old Klansmen. Kind of at the top, making money was more the goal than anything else. In 1921, Simmons gave an interview to the Atlanta Journal that was basically his sales pitch to the nation for the Ku Klux Klan from a write-up in the National Museum of American History website. Quote, while explicitly advocating white supremacy, Simmons played up his group's commitment to law and order, promoted their enforcement of prohibition, and even boasted of his own police credentials. He claimed members at every level of law enforcement belonged to his organization, and that the local sheriff was often one of the first to join when the Klan came to a town. Ominously, Simmons declared that the sheriff of Fulton County knows where he can get 200 members of the Klan at a moment's call to suppress anything in the way of lawlessness.
There it is.
Yeah, and he wasn't blowing hot air when he said this. In Anaheim, California, Klansmen won 4 out of 5 seats on the city council, dominating local politics until 1924. They voted to allow officers who were Klan members to patrol wearing their full KKK uniform instead of their normal police uniform. Non-police Klansmen were also allowed to patrol and interrogate citizens in the streets.
Hey, I just want you guys to know that Anaheim's where Disneyland is. So just like let that sink in.
Anaheim.
That's where Anaheim. That's where Disneyland is. You want to go to downtown Disney? It's Anaheim.
Yeah, the city council of Anaheim, who are 80% Klansmen, are like, yeah, cops can just wear their Klan uniforms to do their job. Why not?
It's just a club. Right.
Yeah, and the Klan uniform basically is the same as the police uniform, so, like, we're good.
So, I don't understand the problem. Look, this is probably something for episode 5, but just, like, when I think to myself, like, how anyone can get their brain around, even at that time, after the law done changed, after you fought a war, I just think at the core, it's because you, like, Black people are you're still just functional. You're still just in the brain of the white supremacists at the time. And I think sometimes the stain of that's still here now, where it's like, you're an appliance. Black people are an appliance, right? So when you can make an appliance out of our entire bodies, that's slavery, right? So, and then you move that into mass incarceration to where you like, okay, and segregation and stuff like that. Like, who wants to live in the house with their cows, right? Because and your washing machine doesn't have rights. It's just a washing machine, So if you think of an entire person because of their color as just a function for yourself, and it's not even just Black people, it's like even people that, like, if your argument against, supporting immigrant rights, especially immigrants of Latin American, people is like, well, who's going to pick our cotton or pick our strawberries? Who's going to pick? You still see these people as an appliance. You know what I'm saying? So when I got my 10,000 new followers that saying support Black voices, I wanted to be like, yo, thank you for coming. Here's 10 other things I am. I'm a dad, I got daughters, I'm lactose intolerant, you know what I'm saying? I think butter's disgusting. It's because you still see me as an appliance. You know what I'm saying? So if I'm just the cow, if I'm just a function, so even if it's a function of you learning from me, it's still just a utility. If it's a function of y'all just supposed to pick our fields, you don't get rights, y'all live over there, and I don't understand why the damn refrigerator wants me to treat it like an equal. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, you're just the refrigerator. Like, shut up. You know what, man? Here, we need to figure out something to make the damn cows and pigs understand that they just cows and pigs. You know what I'm saying? So to me, it's like if that's where your brain goes, damn, I went on a rant. But like, if that's where your brain goes, that's why it's so like mind-boggling to these Klans people who's just like, I don't understand why these black people keep asking to sit at our tables.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, yeah, I mean, like, but like that is sort of, this is a really important thing to understand, because we usually talk about Jim Crow, like white people usually talk about Jim Crow. I'm thinking back to like how I was taught about it. Like, it was this terrible thing that happened that was done to black people, which it was a crime. But also what Jim Crow is the foundation of law enforcement. Law enforcement in this country was still very much in flux and being formalized when Jim Crow started. It was really fucking new. Like the first police department had only started in 1838. Jim Crow starts in 1877. So U.S. law enforcement in much, if not most of this country is founded at this, like, more or less at the same time as Jim Crow, which means that U.S. law enforcement is founded in large part to keep the appliances in the eyes of the white elite separated from the white elite. Like that, So, yes.
Get back to the script.
Important point.
Yes.
So the second Klan was also real popular in Oregon, maybe more popular in Oregon than it was anywhere else in the country. And patient zero for the Oregon Klan was the southern town of Medford, which is not... Medford! Which is in...
Where you go watch Shakespeare in the park.
Yeah. No, that's Ashland, which is right next to Medford.
Ashland.
Right. And Ashland is a very different city.
It is. Went to a tea house in Ashland.
There's great tea houses. I actually like Medford and Ashland are both like right next to each other and both in one of the prettiest parts of Oregon and thus one of the prettiest places in the entire planet. Like, I've been all over the damn world. I haven't found anywhere. I found some places that are like up there with that part of Oregon, but I haven't found anything that I find pretty. Like, fucking gorgeous place. Yeah. But also, Medford has a real long history of straight up fascism right into the present day. The mayor of the town of Phoenix, I think it was Phoenix, which is like right outside of Medford, basically a suburb of Medford. The mayor 2 or 3 days ago drove his car into a crowd of Black Lives Matter protesters. The mayor.
Good Lord.
Yeah. So... the issues continue. Yeah.
I wish I could see my face right now. The mayor.
The mayor.
Okay. Wow.
So, Medford is where Luther Powell, the Kleagle sent by the National Klan to establish the Klan in Oregon, set up the state's first KKK outpost. He gained initial recruits by pointing to the massive bootlegging problem in nearby Jackson County and making the case that the Klan could help with law and order. And I'm going to quote now from a paper by Ben Bruce of Chapman University. Powell sold the Klan to potential followers not as a brotherhood of bigotry, but as a beacon of patriotism, cultural conservatism, and social order. According to Powell, the Klan was there to uphold traditional American society against the threat of the Roaring Twenties. Specifically, Powell emphasized the Klan's support for the enforcement of prohibition. In a matter of weeks, Powell had sworn over 100 men into the Invisible Empire, most of who were policemen. Klan expert and author David Chalmers describes the Klan under Powell as being in the law and order business. Luther Powell's recruiting success in Medford cannot be quantified by lists of names on paper on membership dues alone. With his newfound support from local police officers, Powell accused Medford County of insufficient prohibition enforcement policies. He then spearheaded the successful recall of the county sheriff. Within a month, the mayor of Medford was dressed in white robes as well. So... Medford, again, this happens. We're talking about Anaheim and Medford, and like we'll talk about a couple other cities, but this is happening all over the U.S. where like whole city governments and the whole police departments are like, yeah, what if we're just Klansmen too? This is fine.
Yeah.
So Powell's success perfectly embodies what made the second Klan much more successful than the first. The first KKK was literally an insurgent terrorist army. The new KKK positioned itself as a force for law and order, standing alongside the state in order to help keep white people safe. It was again not a vigilante like terrorist organization, but instead the same kind of designated vigilante force. If you remember that from our first couple of episodes, a designated vigilante force like the police. And that's why it was often like a lot of local Klan cells were majority police officers. Yeah. So Powell moved on quickly from Medford to Portland, as most people who visit Medford tend to do. Within months, the city had thousands of Klansmen, and it may have garnered more KKK members more quickly than any other city. Now, again, this rapid success in Portland came in part due from the fact that the Klan was seen as respectable. Shortly after opening, the Portland Klan chapter partnered openly with the Portland Police Bureau. Since the Portland Police Bureau only had 150 men at this point, it considered itself understaffed, and the mayor of Portland decided to appoint a vigilante police auxiliary, and he allowed the KKK to pick the members. These men received police powers and firearms, but their names were kept hidden, effectively turning themselves into a secret police force. I should note here that during the recent protests in Portland, a commander of the Portland Police Force sent out a directive ordering police officers to cover up their names and replace them with numbers that could only be traced back to names internally. Just a fun little thing. Portland Police Bureau, same force that partnered openly with the Klan. Cool stuff.
Oh my God. Portland, where on Burnside and MLK, you can go to a park of just food trucks and you can get craft like vegan waffles. That's in Portland. Yeah. And the cops are Klan members. Like,
and exactly.
Help me. I've heard understand you, Portland.
I've heard a lot of cops and Klan go hand in hand chants in the Portland streets recently.
Yes.
And I obviously a lot of people believe that, but I don't know if those people know that literally the Portland Police Bureau had an official arrangement with the KKK in the 1920s.
Y'all just think it rhymes.
Yeah.
Like, no, seriously.
Yeah. Oh, no, yeah. No, you're literally correct in a very direct way. Not just in these guys are secretly Klan members, but no. Like the PPB had an arrangement. Yes. Yeah. Cool stuff. So, Astoria, Oregon also had a major Klan problem. And this is because it was the most diverse city in the state, which meant at this point didn't mean that it was lowest number of white people. It meant that it had the highest number of Catholic people who came from weird parts of Europe. Like, right. And again, the second Klan in this period, some historians will argue, was actually more racist and violent against Catholics and Jewish people, or at least as racist and violent as it was to black people. Like they've broadened their spate of hatred. Yeah. And obviously, it found a healthy base of resentful Protestant white people in Astoria. Klan leaders brought in anti-Catholic speakers to rile up the public, and they rallied themselves around enforcing vice laws that the police had not handled to their satisfaction. Primarily, they went after prohibition violators and prostitutes. On June 17th, 1922, the Klan sent both local newspapers and the sheriff a letter demanding that he take action against the Whistle Inn, the heart of a local bootlegging operation. 2 weeks before the letter, 2 people had died in a drunken accident after leaving the Whistle Inn. The Klan letter to the sheriff threatened to take care of the problem if he failed to do so. On June 19th, the KKK sent 50 men into the Whistle Inn. They were met by sheriff's deputies who'd been called, ironically, by the bootleggers inside. The sheriff arrested both men, and the whole incident became something of a local scandal. The Klan used it to petition for a recall election, which they again succeeded in getting. Their candidate won the recall election, giving them control of Astoria's sheriff's department, and soon after they swept local government elections too. Variations of this story repeated themselves all over Oregon, and the Klan was eventually successful in electing their own candidate for governor. Walter M. Pierce. His regime passed the Oregon compulsory school bill, which required all children from 8 to 15 to attend public school. That sounds innocuous enough on the surface, but the purpose of the bill was to destroy all Catholic schools because those were not public. And again, the KKK really hates Catholics. And definitely the Oregon Klan is more anti-Catholic than it is anti-black, but only because there's not a whole lot of black people in Oregon, right?
There wasn't nobody left.
Yeah. There was it's like 95% white people at this point. So that's why the KKK is so focused on, although they also focus a lot on Japanese and Chinese immigrants, and like this governor that they elect pushes a bill to basically make it impossible to move to Oregon or work in Oregon as an Asian person. And you know, both the anti-compulsory bill and the anti-Asians bills, like those get struck down. And this governor who is backed by the Klan winds up kind of turning on the Klan, not because he's a good guy, but because he thinks that after he gets elected, he doesn't really feel loyal to the Klan anymore. Yeah. So anyway, it's a complicated story. But
so is the Klan. I'm just like, man, like y'all. Sometimes I feel like the more I learn about them, I'm just like, man, y'all are all over the place. Yeah. Like sometimes I can't even I can't even connect the dots of their hatred. Like how are we talking about Jews right now? Like, where it's like, when did we get to that? You know, or I can imagine, I would love to see a skit where somebody's trying to complain where some new kids in the back of the room at the Klan meeting and can't keep up with like, wait, we're talking about Catholics now? What they do? Wait, what's the problem? You know what I'm saying? Like, just like, I can't even, this is a complete tangent, but I'm just like, I can't keep up, man. I'm like, y'all all over. Just dang, man, at least be consistent.
Yeah.
Ad break.
Oh yeah, we should.
That was smooth.
Thank you.
Yeah, here's have a handful of products, buckaroos. We're back. We have returned. And we're talking still about the Oregon Klan. So the Oregon KKK's success in local and state politics gave them the legitimacy they needed to feel comfortable carrying out acts of violence. On April 11th, 1922, a 22-year-old Latino man named Sam Johnson was grabbed in the middle of the night by a group of robed Klansmen. They dragged him into the forest and they hung him from a tree, quote, not long enough to kill him, but sufficiently long to give him a glance into eternity, according to a local paper. While he lay on the ground, recovering, the mob told him that he had to leave town or they would come back and kill him. This semi-lynching was again reported on in the local paper, but no arrests were made. The county sheriff, who was almost certainly one of the men who abducted Sam, called him a bad actor who just hadn't done anything serious enough to get arrested. So, he doesn't have a criminal record, but we decided he was a criminal, so it's fine to hang him from a tree.
He got it on him, though. I could see it.
Yeah. The sheriff accused him of bootlegging without any evidence and washed his hands of the case. On March 18th, a Catholic piano salesman named J.F. Hale was assaulted in the same way, taken at gunpoint into the woods and then hung almost to death. This time, the demand was made that Hale drop a lawsuit against another Medford man for an unpaid debt, and that he also leave town. The sheriff said the kidnapping, too, was of no local interest.
Oh, gosh.
It's also worth noting that there was a recent, last year, a trans black woman who was murdered in the city of Portland, and the death was written off, who died in the city of Portland. The police ruled it a suicide. There's a lot that's shady about it. The family has asked for it to be investigated, and the police said that investigating it further was not of local interest. So that's cool. That's a cool thing that, again, got to point out how this never stopped and has never really even slowed down in a lot of ways.
Good Lord. Yeah, I'm like, this playbook has never failed these fools. You know what I'm saying?
So fucked up.
Yes.
Yeah. On April 2nd, a black railroad worker who'd just been released from jail over prohibition violation was kidnapped, hung again, and ordered to flee the town. As he ran away, he heard men shouting back at him, "Can you run, N-word?" while some in the crowd fired at his feet with their revolvers. By this point, local media had begun covering the Klan's abductions in outraged articles. One in the Medford Mail Tribune revealed that the state Klan leadership had actually sent notes to individual members within the county with instructions on how to carry out these necktie attacks. The Klan denied these letters since they had not been sent on official Klan letterhead.
What?
Again, they had a lot of products. The Klan had a lot of products and services actually in this period.
This don't count because it wasn't on letterhead.
They sold insurance. Yeah.
This is incredible.
So Kleagle H.E. Griffith, who was the guy who had taken over the Medford Klan, demanded.
Can you name his? Can you say his title again? Just
Kleagle.
Just Kleagle.
Kleagle.
I heard something else.
Okay, now go on.
I heard something else.
What? Yeah, exercises that women do to keep going.
Oh, yes, it does sound like that. Yeah. Now, so H.E. Griffith
demanded... Thank you for knowing that, though, Prop. Thank you.
Hey, girl dad. You know what I'm saying?
There you go.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
So, the Medford Mail Tribune writes a letter about how the Klan is very obviously behind all this, and the guy in charge of the Medford Klan demands that the newspaper give him a chance to respond. And the Medford Mail Tribune lets him release a statement through the paper denying any role in the semi-lynchings. Gotta tell both sides of the story. Ben Bruce writes, quote, Kleagle H.E. Griffith gave an official statement denying any prior knowledge of the aforementioned events as well as the Klan's alleged involvement. Griffith accused the local papers of severely misrepresenting the facts. In the same article, Griffith endorsed the Klan as a regular, fraternal, patriotic, and benevolent order that stands for pure Americanism, protection of pure womanhood, free speech and press, free public schools, restricted immigration, white supremacy, and law and order, and consistently assists all law officers in the performance of their duties. That's cool. Surprisingly, the people of Medford did not believe these denials, or at least enough of them didn't, that public outrage did force a trial, which occurred nearly a year later. 19 Klansmen were charged with participating in the necktie parties as they came to be known. One of the men was the former police chief of Medford.
Good Lord.
The main witness was J.F. Hale, the piano salesman, but the state decided he was not a reputable citizen, largely because his son had been born out of wedlock. It is the 20s.
Oh my God. Okay.
Wow.
It's fucking cool. Yeah. All charges against the Klansmen were dropped. Yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah. So you remember that? You remember last year that at that anti-abortion protest where that little boy was like eye to eye with that Native American man, and like the whole picture went.
Oh boy,
viral.
Howdy! Yeah,
you remember
that
that
fucking thing? Yeah.
So
Christ.
what you're just explaining explains in a lot of ways why everybody looked at that moment and saw two different things, because what the terror that a lot of us are talking about, like why this was so frustrating, was because the ambiguity of this kid's face, of just being like, he is just a kid, he is kind of smirking, right? Mm-hmm. And you could say, well, he didn't do anything, he didn't interrupt the guy, he's just standing there looking at him. But if they're at his own protest, it's fine. But when you hear stories like this, and I can't say because I'm not in that kid's head and I wasn't there, I'm just saying, when I look at it, I see the history you're explaining. The idea that these boys can function without any what's the word I'm looking for? Punitive. Their impunity. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. But the point is, they not finna get in trouble. That's what I'm trying to say, right? So you can always lean back and be like, what? I didn't do anything. So, and I just remembered how many times in my own life recognizing that smirk, knowing that no matter what this kid did, no matter how terrible it is, no matter how much evidence I have, he will not be punished. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So that's so whether I know what this kid was thinking or not, it's like, this is what America saw. There was two Americas. One side of America saw this kid's gonna, no matter what, he's not gonna get in trouble.
Nope.
You know what I'm
saying? This is why when we finally do reform law enforcement, disband the police and replace it with something better, one of the federal agencies we need is a federal branch that is just groups of people who go door to door and just give people one solid punch in the face when they really deserve it. When they've we shouldn't be sending them to prison. They didn't do a prison thing, but like, you were a dick and now you're going to get hit in the face.
You just need a good slapping.
Somebody needs to just smack you in the damn face. I think it's Backfengeschicht, which is like a face in need of a fist is the direct translation. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes people just need to get, like, not hard, not enough to do damage. Like, we'll train these people to deliver, like, legally appropriate slaps and punches. But, like, you were a dick and somebody needs to fucking smack you. And, like, it should be a group of men and women in suits who come to your door and say, like, you have been selected to get smacked in the face because you were a dick and you need to know it. That's my suggestion.
It's not a bad one.
Yeah. So Oregon's Klan was relatively nonviolent. And I again, this tells you how bad the second Klan was. We're calling, like, lynchings that don't kill anybody relatively nonviolent compared to the Klan in Oklahoma, for example, had a horrifically violent Klan that also eventually wound up in charge of a lot of the different state or like local cities and police departments and stuff. And it was also comparatively nonviolent when you sort of put it against the Klan in Indiana, for example. There in Indiana, the KKK was successful in infiltrating a local civilian law enforcement agency, the Horse Thief Detective Association. Now, this odd group got its start in the 1840s, and its members were basically licensed vigilantes with the right to protect property via violence. And as you can guess by the name, they started to prosecute horse thieves, right? Yes. Law enforcement can't catch all these horse thieves. We'll deputize civilians. We'll give them the right to, like, arrest and fuck up people to stop horse thievery. But they also had kind of broader rights to enforce laws. Now, the birth of the automobile reduced the Horse Thief Detective Association to a somewhat irrelevant group. But when the KKK came to Indiana in the early 1920s, they saw that, like, there was this organization that civilians who were Klansmen could join, and it would give them the right to carry out violence with state backing. So they start flooding the HDTA with membership, and they also start giving existing members in the HDTA free and subsidized membership in the KKK because they see that, like, this weird little organization gives them the right to enforce the law in Indiana without, like, having to get elected sheriff or anything or put, even recruit police officers. So the Indiana Klan starts pouring money into the HDTA and offering their existing members low-priced entry into the Klan. Quote, as sworn members of HDTA chapters, Klansmen in the state essentially formed an armed, officially sanctioned force that would allow them to enact their agenda under the guise of legitimate law enforcement. Now, in his work on the Klan in Indiana, historian Leonard J. Moore details membership records from 1925 that show that over 20% of the state's eligible population, white Protestant native-born males, belonged to the KKK. In some counties, that number exceeded 33%. In Marion County, which included the city of Indianapolis, over a quarter of eligible men belonged to the Ku Klux Klan, some 25,000 members in total, many of whom held dual membership in the HDTA chapter.
Okay, wait. They paid dues?
Yeah, oh yeah. No, it was a for-profit endeavor.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
Which I forgot how lame that even makes it even more lame.
Yeah, they're a lot.
Y'all paid to be in here? So lame.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I'm going to quote again from historian Leonard J. Moore. Quote, as horse thief detectives, the Indiana Klan came down on bootleggers, organized labor, immigrants, and African-American populations. In one incident related in Elliot Jaspin's book, Buried in the Bitter Waters, they helped expel black citizens from the mining town of Blandford in western Indiana. On January 18th, 1923, a young girl from Blandford reported that she had been abducted and assaulted by an African-American man. Within 48 hours, several hundred white townsfolk met and demanded that all black residents leave, beginning with unmarried men who were to be outside town limits by that evening. Within a week, all black residents of Blandford, approximately 50 people, had fled. That exodus was overseen by Harry Newland, the sheriff of Vermilion County and himself a Klansman, along with members of the Dana HDTA and the Helt Township HDTA, two of the 4 chapters in the area. The Helt Township chapter alone included over a dozen members of the Klan, including its captain. African-American citizens, both in Blandford and the surrounding county, felt forced to comply and departed en masse. As Jaspin notes, the 1920 census recorded well over 200 black residents in Vermilion County. In 1930, that number was less than 70. Wow. That's an act of ethnic cleansing. That's what we call ethnic cleansing. Yeah.
That's what that's called. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Indiana, y'all. The KKK was active all throughout. And again, think about this. Think about this civilian group with law enforcement powers enforcing white supremacy. When you think about, for example, armed members of far-right militias showing up to support the police at protests.
Yes.
Yeah. So the KKK was active all throughout the United States during this period, eventually reaching a peak of like 4 million members. There exists no accurate nationwide count for how many people were forced out of their homes by the Klan, how many were assaulted by them or killed by them, just as there exists no comprehensive accounting for how often this behavior occurred either with the consent or the enthusiastic help of the police. In either case, it may be a mistake to even attempt to quantify the KKK's part in this specifically, because the violence of both the first and second Klan occurred within a much broader context of mass violence against black people by white people with the express consent of law enforcement. This violence started up during Reconstruction and continued all the way into 1950. We tend to call it lynching today, although it took a variety of forms, and we will never know how many black men were killed during this period, but the Equal Justice Initiative estimates 6,500 at the minimum. These murders occurred at a steady pace, with intermittent eruptions that were spurred on by a mix of economic recessions, war, and white resentment of black success. And all that brings me to the story of the Red Summer of 1919. Have you heard of this, Prop?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm going to guess, I think because of the show Watchmen, actually, a lot more white people know about Tulsa now, which we'll be talking about in part 2. I don't think very many, I didn't know about fucking Red Summer until like a week or 2 ago. So
it's part 4.
Part 4, Jesus. Part 4 for the week. Part 2 for the week. Okay, well,
okay.
Yeah. The next episode, we will talk about Tulsa.
We'll talk about Tulsa, but this is,
Red Summer 1919.
Again, this is the type of stuff that, like I said before, if it's not in your experience, you'd have to go out of your way to know this. Right?
Exactly.
But if it is, it's like, this is why I will always hammer, like, having a good, strong sense of self, a sense of community, and then having relationships across communities. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So that now you don't sound like an asshole when you don't know what the fuck you're talking about because you don't know people from other places. You know what I'm saying? So this is so anyway, all that to say.
And this shit won't be in your textbooks.
No, and it's not going to be. It's not going to be.
No. You're lucky if you get a paragraph on the Red Summer in a textbook, and not all textbooks. Yeah. Mine sure didn't have it. It is in some textbooks because some of the articles I read on it were specifically analyzing how it's covered in textbooks. But again, generally about a paragraph. Yeah. Now, the Red Summer is the name given by NAACP leader James Weldon Johnson for the months in 1919 when a wave of racist riots, race riots is often the term, I think racist riots is more accurate, broke out against black communities in Charleston, South Carolina, Longview, Texas, Bisbee, Arizona, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Knoxville, Omaha, and Elaine, Arkansas. At least 150 people were killed in the violence and 100 or so more lynched, but it's probably more like 1,000 dead. You'll hear again. We're never gonna get a good accounting.
And I hope the listeners hear, like, as he gets into this story again, just like we said, to the militia folk that are like, how come black people don't arm? And when we say, you think we ain't thought of that, right? Now, as you listen to this story, when people say, well, how come you don't build your own businesses and support your own community and start your own capitalistic spaces? Let me say, you think we ain't thought of that?
Yeah.
Continue.
So obviously, Klan members were involved with and behind a great deal of the violence of Red Summer, but not necessarily most of it. Although in Pittsburgh, the KKK chapter posted up notices around a black neighborhood which stated, "The war is over, Negroes. Stay in your place. If you don't, we'll put you there." Which is a little ironic because a lot of Red Summer involved white crowds going into black neighbors.
Coming to black neighborhoods.
Yeah, exactly.
Minding our own business.
Fucking A.
Yeah.
So, while Klansmen were regular drivers of violence during Red Summer, uniformed police officers played at least as large a role, maybe even a larger one. One of the first riots started in Chicago on July 27th after a black child mistakenly swam into a chunk of beach that was whites only under Jim Crow. White people on the beach saw this child, Eugene Williams, and started pelting him with rocks. Every time he would attempt to come to shore, they would throw more rocks at him. He eventually drowned. This brought a crowd of furious black citizens out. More rocks were thrown, a white officer showed up, observed the situation, and decided to arrest a black guy.
Yeah.
This for obvious reasons, helped push tensions in Chicago to a boiling point. The resulting riot led to 38 mostly black deaths, and the police responded with a mix of complete neglect, often allowing the white mobs to do violence, and occasional acts of giving a shit, possibly due to the presence of black men on the Chicago PD. The most notable example of this was probably the Chicago police holding back a white mob from burning down a hospital filled with mostly black patients. The only CPD officer to die during the riot was a black man. Red Summer actually continued into the fall, and one of its bloodiest hotspots was Phillips County, Arkansas. On September 30th, a small group of black people gathered at a rural church to organize a sharecroppers union. Two white policemen showed up, and they had been sent there specifically to stop the union from organizing. So again, we do have some interchange with what we talked about in the last episode, where the police exist to stop unions for wealthy people. Anyway, so they claimed they were looking for a bootlegger, and what happened next is unclear, but a gunfight broke out, and one officer was killed, almost certainly in self-defense, by the people in that meeting. The local sheriff sent out a call for armed random white dudes to, quote, hunt Mr. N-word, and he did not use the N-word. He used the N-word, but he didn't, he used the real one. Hunt Mr. N-word in his lair. Hundreds of white dudes from all over the area and even from the adjoining state of Mississippi showed up in Phillips County with guns. They opened fire wildly at every black person they saw with the enthusiastic consent and help of the police. Frank Moore, a black farmer, survived the massacre. He later recalled, "The whites sent word that they was coming down here to kill every N-word they found. There were 300 or 400 or more white men with guns shooting and killing women and children." Now, of course, Klansmen were involved, and some of those Klansmen were likely police officers. But the violence in Phillips County was backed by state and local officials, lawmen and business owners, not just a vigilante social club. The official death toll was 11 black men and 5 white men killed. The real number of murdered black people is believed to range from anywhere from 100 to 237. At one point, the white mobs were aided by federal troops as well. Local reporters helped the government cover up the massacre by claiming the violence had been white self-defense against a black uprising. One Arkansas Gazette article opened with the headline, "Negroes plan to kill all whites."
Lord.
Yeah.
You can just make it up. And going into some of these specific communities.
Yeah.
Just to color some of the story, were becoming affluent. Especially the ones in South Carolina. They were like, okay, listen, you don't want to do business with us? Fine. So they was opening banks, selling their own homes, starting their own businesses, growing their own crops. It was like, okay, it's fine. We don't have to live together. It's fine. You know what I'm saying? And then all of the sudden, somebody just come knocking down. It's like, what do you...
And, specifically sparked by that community, sharecroppers of the community being like, we need to agitate together to have a better deal in a legal and constitutionally protected way. Oh, now you're shooting at us. Now you're shooting at us.
You're just okay, so we're not 3/5 human anymore. The law applies to us. It seems like this system of sharecropping don't work. Maybe we should work together and kind of figure out a better way to, we're citizens now.
So we have this right. Yeah.
We have this right. Oh, guess we don't.
Nope. You're shooting us. Okay.
Yeah. This is just like I was in fear of my life bullshit that cops use every second of every day.
They were uprising. You'll hear that again in the next episode too.
Yeah. No, they were minding their own business.
I was afraid of the woman sleeping in her own house. What?
Yeah. It's I'm not a big Chairman Mao fan, but when he said political power comes from the barrel of a gun, he was not incorrect. And that's what you see here, right? Right? That's what Red Summer is.
Yes.
Yeah, and I recognize things are getting a little bit muddled here in this podcast about the history of the police, vis-a-vis the difference between the vigilante violence, the KKK violence, the police violence that is KKK violence, and that's because very real history is always muddled. And in this period, police were often perpetrators in lynchings and white mob violence against black people. They also, more often, failed to intervene in this sort of thing, and they did sometimes fight against it, often because there were black officers on the force, but there were, in this period, it is important to note, some very brave white officers who were like, this isn't fucking okay. I'm not trying to erase those people. But nationwide, as a whole, police completely failed to defend black citizens in any organized, meaningful way during the Red Summer of 1919. White people initiated more or less 100% of the violence during this summer, and law enforcement consistently failed to protect them. In Washington, D.C., while white mobs marched through black neighborhoods firing wildly, the police response was so lackluster that the mayor had to call in the military in order to protect the city's black citizens. The individual racism of white officers, mixed with the simple reality that police had never been intended to protect poor neighborhoods or businesses in an organized fashion, left black people with no option but to protect themselves. And to tell that story in brief, I'm going to quote from an article in Teen Vogue by Ursula Wolf Rocca. Quote, "In Knoxville, Tennessee, armed black men organized themselves to successfully repel hundreds of white rioters who had already destroyed the county jail with a battering ram and dynamite. In Chicago, African Americans formed self-defense units after days of white terror in their neighborhoods. Many of these defenders were veterans, among the 370,000 black men inducted into the Army during World War I, who hoped fighting for democracy abroad might finally secure their first-class citizenship at home. The mob violence in Chicago convinced Harry Haywood, a veteran of the all-black 370th Infantry Regiment, he'd made a mistake. As he explained, I had been fighting the wrong war. The Germans weren't the enemy. The enemy was right here at home." In Washington,
There it is.
Yeah.
The muddle is I love that you said muddled, because that's the point.
Yeah.
That's the point we're trying to make when it comes to policing in America. It is muddled. I should be able to tell the difference. Yeah. I should be able to go, that is the Klan, these are the police. I should be. Yeah. And that's our point. I can't tell the difference. That's the point.
Yep. I'm going to continue that quote about black self-defense during Red Summer. In Washington, D.C., 17-year-old Carrie Johnson opened fire on men breaking into her home while 1,000 white rioters laid siege to her neighborhood. In Anniston, Alabama, in December of 1918, a black veteran, Sergeant Edgar Caldwell, was ordered out of the white section of a streetcar. He refused. Kicked out of the car and set upon by the white motorman and conductor, Caldwell shot his pistol twice, killing one of his attackers. Though uncoordinated, when looked at together, these hundreds of moments in and leading up to 1919 read as an awesome display of collective black agency and self-preservation. So again, black armed self-defense often is overwhelmed by, again, the sheer number of white people, their additional resources, their backing of the state, but it also works out sometimes, and it saves a lot of lives when it does. So I don't want to be saying, like, it's not a tactic that succeeds. It historically has.
Yes.
In 2016, City Councilwoman Angelia Williams took to the stage at an NAACP luncheon. She told the crowd that modern racists had, quote, taken off their white hats and white sheeted robes and put on police uniforms. Some of them have put on shirts and ties as policymakers, and some of them have put on robes as judges. This did not go over well, and she was roundly pilloried by law enforcement officials, a lot of whom were like Democrats, and a wide variety of elected local Democrats. But if Councilwoman Williams had wanted to bring up recent cases of folks who worked forces and also burnt crosses, she would not have had to Google hard. In 2012, a Little Rock, Arkansas officer who'd attended at least one KKK meeting shot and killed a 15-year-old black child. In 2015, video leaked of Anniston, Alabama police officer Joshua Dogrel delivering a speech for the League of the South. Now, the League of the South is a neo-Confederate organization, and for all intents and purposes, just a dressed-up rebranding of the KKK that tries to look a little bit more palatable. These motherfuckers marched with the Nazis in Charlottesville in 2017. Dogrel had joined the League in 1995. He'd been a police officer since 2006. He talked openly about the League of the South to his fellow officers. He advised them to join, and he held meetings at a steakhouse very close to the police station. He posted pro-Confederate content on his Facebook, including pictures of early KKK leaders. Dogrel's Klan affiliations were doubly concerning given Anniston's history. In May of 1961, the Freedom Riders had shown up in town to protest against segregation and Jim Crow. They were assaulted by a mass of Klansmen who slashed their tires, broke their bus windows, and tried to light the bus on fire with them in it. The Anniston Police Department was headquartered a block away from this, a little closer than the steakhouse where Officer Dogrel would decades later hold meetings. Anniston officers failed to arrive at the scene of the crime until hours later. No one was arrested. They may have been late because a number of them probably had to change out of their robes and into their uniforms.
Because they were there.
Because they were trying to burn the bus down. Yeah.
Yes.
Now, I cannot point you to any specific act of racial violence that Officer Doggerel committed while in uniform, as it is damnably hard to get good information on police misbehavior from the very best police departments, and Anniston is not one of those. But significant evidence suggests that Officer Doggerel and his membership in what is a Confederate organization is not a one-off. From an article in The Guardian, quote, although it is unusual for a police officer to be so open about his involvement in an extremist organization, for decades, anti-government white supremacist groups have been attempting to recruit police officers into their ranks. It is something a lot of folks are overlooking, says Vita B. Johnson, an assistant professor of law at Georgetown University. Police forces are becoming more interested in talking about implicit bias, the unconscious racial biases we carry with us as Americans, but people aren't really addressing the explicit biases that are present on police forces. According to Johnson's research, there have been at least 100 different scandals in more than 40 different states involving police officers who have sent racist emails and text messages or made racist comments on social media since the 1990s. A recent investigation by the Center for Investigative Reporting found that hundreds of active duty and retired law enforcement officers from around the country were members of Confederate, anti-government, and anti-Islam groups on Facebook. But there is no official record of officers who are tied to white supremacists or other extremist groups because, in the U.S., there is no federal policy for screening or monitoring the country's 800,000 plus law enforcement officers for extremist views. The 18,000 or so police departments across the country are largely left to police themselves. Now,
of course.
Yeah, that's a good call. Yeah. Hey, I have a suggestion. If they police themselves, why don't we police ourselves?
I mean, apparently the system works.
Yeah.
According to you. Do you know what I'm saying? I just, you can't, people think you think we're making this stuff up when we say, yo, cops are racist. I'm trying to tell you, it's racism over there. Like, what possible gain do any of us have accusing falsely an entire organization to be racist? What do you think my end game would be? There's no, I gain nothing from making this stuff up.
Yeah, and again, like, people always focus on, like, oh, well, that's not that many police officers, when you read them, the numbers like that, compared to how many there are. And it's like, well, no, those are the ones that individual activists have, after hours, probably, for each individual officer, tracked down and verified. Because, again, the government's not looking into this. But also, let's say there's a block party that happens next to your house, right?
Yes.
100 people. One of those people shoots you in the arm with a handgun for no reason, and everyone else in the crowd hangs out around them and does nothing. And you complain about it, and they're like, well, it was only one of us that shot you. Does that matter?
Not at all.
Yeah. They're kind of all pieces of shit, right?
You kind of all just let me lay there.
Yeah. Kind of a shit party.
Yeah. I don't like you or your homies.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. In 2017, a classified FBI counterterrorism policy guide was obtained by The Intercept. I don't know how they got this, but there are actually quite a few FBI agents who are real pissed about this problem and seem to be vigorously leaking information to the press. In a section focused on how the Bureau lists individuals on a terrorism watch list, the authors note that, quote, and again, the authors being the fucking FBI, domestic terrorism investigations focused on militia extremists, white supremacist extremists, and sovereign citizen extremists often have identified active links to law enforcement officers. The FBI goes on to note that they had to alter some of their policies when dealing with local law enforcement to account for the fact that so many of them are members of extremist groups.
It's too many of y'all.
Yeah, we've had to change how we interact with cops as the FBI because we're scared of you motherfuckers.
God, duh.
One of the justifiable criticisms of this series we're doing is that we're not really going to lean into the FBI much because I've kind of determined to focus on like cops, like normal police, law, like the folks in the street. Even though there is a very long and well worth discussing history of racism within the FBI, we talk about that quite a bit in our two-parter on the bastards who killed the Black Panthers.
Yeah, we did.
We'll get into it a bit next week, but we're going to focus really on beat cops essentially, and what leads to them, police departments. Just because we can't do this for 10 straight weeks. We both have other stuff we got to deal with.
Yeah.
The term ghost skins is often used by white supremacists to refer to folks who basically hide their power level to gain respected jobs in society and advanced white supremacy. Law enforcement is a particularly prized field for these ghost skins because it gives them virtually unchecked opportunities to do violence to non-white people. One example of this would be a gang of officers within the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department who in 1991 embarked on a campaign of vandalism and the beating and torturing of black Californians. Have you heard of the Linwood Vikings? Prop?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. The Linwood Vikings were a violent neo-Nazi gang that committed arson and murder and torture on black Californians, and the gang was entirely made up of Los Angeles County Sheriff's officers. It was a neo-Nazi gang that was all sheriff's officers.
Let that sink in.
Let that sink in and now think of the young man who was recently found hung to death in Palmdale, California, and who was declared a suicide by Los Angeles Sheriff's Department.
Yes.
And then the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department was in a gunfight with his half-brother where they killed him a couple of days later.
Yes.
And that it is reported that the Palmdale chunk of the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department has what they call, the news called cliques within it.
Yeah.
That were, you might call them gangs, maybe like the Linwood Vikings, because this keeps happening. Weird.
Because this is not history. It's
yeah.
Yes.
People need to know more about the Linwood Vikings.
Yeah.
So, it's cool. We're going to talk about John Burge in Chicago in the next episode. Okay. But for right now, The Intercept goes on to give a couple other examples, and I'm going to quote from their article again. In Cleveland, officials found that a number of police officers had scrawled racist or Nazi graffiti throughout their department's locker rooms. In Texas, 2 police officers were fired when it was discovered that they were Klansmen. One of them said he had tried to boost the organization's membership by giving an application to a fellow officer he thought shared his white Christian heterosexual values. Now, in 2015, to his very minor credit, FBI Director James Comey acknowledged in a speech that all of us in law enforcement must be honest enough to acknowledge that much of our history is not pretty. Yeah. This is about as close as you're going to get to having an actual member of law enforcement admit that. In fact, the cops and the Klan regularly do go hand in hand. So, good stuff.
Take a deep breath, everybody. Breathe
good stuff.
In.
Yeah.
Breathe out.
Mm-hmm. Woo! Woo!
Yeah. Welcome to the rest of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about lynching on Thursday. And we're going to talk about how the police defeated lynching by something that's arguably as bad. So,
yeah.
Yay.
Yeah. I feel wonderful right now.
Should have maybe not scheduled this recording session for Juneteenth. I do feel bad about that.
I don't know. That's the day my emotions are all over the place right now. Nah, it's all good. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, in a lot of ways, like we were talking off mic, like, I don't know, because it's never actually, we've never had to celebrate this holiday with anybody else. So there's no actual traditions for Juneteenth.
Yeah.
Except for to think about what all the shit we done went through. Yeah. And the fact that we survived it. You know what I'm saying? That's usually and then we go down to, you know, Crenshaw and eat some barbecue. But I'm like, this is actually great. It's like, look, and maybe we'll end it on a high note. It's like, and yet we still exist.
Yeah.
And yet we still are here. You know?
Yeah. And like have been forcing the situation to suck less consistently for a couple of centuries of fighting like the emotional equivalent of trench warfare. Yeah. And I guess a good tradition for white folks like myself and like Sophie is to do this, is to spend Juneteenth going like, Jesus Christ. Oh, fuck.
We did what?
Yeah. Oh, good God. Prop, you got any pluggables to plug before we roll out of here?
Yeah, dude. prophiphop.com. I got a bunch of new merch. California is now required face masks, so I got some face masks there.
Hell yeah.
You hear that, flat earther neighbors? Required by state.
Yeah. You got flat earther neighbors.
Dude,
Can we just pause for that one?
I mean, statistically, we all do now.
Yeah.
There's like, I had the building make like red signs that say to wear face masks in the elevator. And Karen and Ken, I don't know their fucking names. I hate them.
Of course.
Would just walk around like, dee, 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 dee. And then I'm like, hey, how about a face mask? And they kind of just look at me like I've said something in a language they don't understand and run away.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, go get some coffee, go get some face masks. Got some new water flasks too.
Yeah.
Prop has the best merch, you guys.
Dude, thank you. And it's all earth friendly. It's all like zero waste. Like that's how I work. You know what I'm saying? Recyclable. Yep. The material is recyclable, or is recycled material. You know what I'm saying? I'm out here like being the good part of Portland. Mm-hmm. All earth sensitive.
Hell yeah. Well, that's the episode. Go do some stuff.
Yeah.
Behind the Police is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.